it's not just Congress, it's American politics and government more broadly. Implicated as well are the presidency, the Supreme Court, our state governments, state legislatures, it's the groups surrounding the government, it's the press, it's the whole thing.
This is At Brookings, a weekly, in-depth look at issues behind the news. This week, politics in America. Could it be worse than it looks?
Divergent ideologies have always been welcomed in American politics, but is the very democratic process that defines the nation imperiled by an alarming and pervasive level of partisan dysfunction? A new book says yes, and in fact, it's even worse than it looks, according to its co-author, senior fellow Tom Mann. Tom, you looked at all of the American political system and drew the assessments that you write about in your book. And yet you point your finger squarely at one guilty party, the Republican Party.
In this book, we are like the boy who noted the emperor wore no clothes. That is, we are saying this is not a case of they're both implicated, it's the system. No, in this case, it's the Republican Party that has gone so far off the tracks, both in terms of their substantive agenda and probably more important, their willingness to do anything, to have their way, to avoid any form of compromise that has intensified our dysfunctional politics.
And you also refer to the GOP as insurgent outliers. Why do you say that?
They really reject a century's worth of economic and social policy. Their ambitions are not to balance the budget, to make whole our social safety net programs. Their mission is really to renegotiate, to relitigate the entire edifice of public policy in the name of the government's gotten out of control, it's too big, or we have these towering deficits, we have a socialist president. If you parse those statements and look inside for facts, for evidence, for truth value, you come away realizing there is none.
And even beyond lawmakers, you say that the press is culpable in this dysfunction as well. Explain that.
One of the big problems, not with the partisan media, but with the mainstream responsible media, where superb reporters and editors are at work, is their fear of being accused of political bias leads them to a norm of balance. Oftentimes it becomes a phony balance because the two parties, if we are correct, are very different right now, and that story ought to be the number one story being reported to the public so they can understand that. But instead, they're both to blame. It's the system that's broke, and that tends to be a disservice to the public. It reinforces their view that the best thing to do is just throw the bums out.
And then, Tom, there's also the issue of big money corroding the political system, super PACs. Tell me about it.
What you do is get large amounts of money contributed to run intensely negative ads against the candidate opposing the one they favor. That's so much a part of our system right now, and the parties themselves have become important fundraising devices and use independent spending and affiliated groups in a variety of ways. So the intense hyper-partisanship that exists is intensified by the intense competition between the parties for money to win the incremental seats that will allow them to control the White House or be in the majority in the House and the Senate.
And what about the electorate? Does it fall on voters to help change the system, change this dynamic?
The natural instinct of voters when things aren't going well is not to parse their policies, but to say, hey, if things aren't going well, let's throw the bums out and give the others a chance to operate. In our political system, with frequent elections, at least a national election every 2 years, that dynamic sort of tends to produce divided party government. When the parties are polarized, it almost guarantees gridlock, inaction on the problems the public is concerned with. But then if things are still going bad, the instinct is not to pay attention to what the alternative party is proposing, but to simply vote no to the party in power. That's the challenge that President Obama has going into this election season.
And of course, the filibuster, which you say is now used simply as a tool of obstruction.
The filibuster has existed as a possibility, but was always used with great restraint. Even up to the 50s and early 60s, it was the exception. And the minority party or minority group of senators of both parties would feel obliged to take to the floor and dramatize their opposition. All that's changed. Basically, we've gone to something like 10% of major legislation subject to filibuster-related delay to 90%. That's the game now. In my view, because of the filibuster, the United States Senate is the most dysfunctional legislative body in the democratic world.
Our political system hasn't been in such dire straits, so dysfunctional since before the Civil War.
Listen, we've faced crises in the past. I mean, it's a little scary when we compare ourselves to the pre-Civil War days, but we've had other tough periods of deep polarization, bitterness, controversy. We managed eventually to come out of it, but it's not going to happen by itself. There's no natural self-correcting dynamic in the system. We've got to call attention to everyone, to the real drivers of the problem, and get working on the solution.
Stay up to date with the latest research, learn about Brookings events, and search our directory of experts, all from your mobile device. To download Brookings for your BlackBerry, Android, iPhone, or iPad, go to brookings.edu/mobile.